Okay, hello everyone. This is the makeup class for Global Communication 2. This is our 11th class. This is for section 9, Wednesdays and Fridays at 3 p.m. Thank you very much for coming online to see this special makeup lecture. Today, I want to talk a little bit about narrative essays. I think narrative essays are, in one sense, one of the easiest types of writing for students to do, but in another regard, they can be quite difficult, quite challenging for some students. First of all, I think that narrative essays, or any kind of narrative writing for that matter, can be quite easy for many students because they get a chance to write about themselves. And a lot of people enjoy sharing their experiences. But on the other hand, experiences, especially significant moments in our lives, can be quite personal, and opening up about something meaningful that's happened to you can be difficult for many as well. So sort of a juxtaposition there. On the one hand, we have narrative writing, and it's good or it's easy for students because they're able to write about something that they know quite well. And I think people generally like to talk about themselves. But on the other hand, they can also be difficult, especially if you're not comfortable sharing experiences that you've had with other people. Today, I'll be talking about the structure, the purpose. I'll be looking at some examples of narrative writing, and I'll try and give you as good a sense as possible as to what makes a good narrative essay, some things that you should try and follow when you do your own narrative writing, as well as some common mistakes that students make, and hopefully you can avoid as you develop as a writer. Okay, so let's start, shall we? Here we go. The purpose of a narrative essay is just to tell a story about your personal experience, maybe an event, maybe a memory. It could be a milestone, meaning some sort of event that marked a sort of progress or some sort of accomplishment in your life, or it could be a turning point. A turning point is something that changes the direction of your life. It could alter the way you're going to continue living into the future. Or it might not be a milestone. It might not be a turning point. It might just be a memory that has some kind of personal significance. We'll be looking at all those examples today. So first off, let's take a look at the basic structure of a narrative essay. A narrative essay, like most other academic forms of writing, has a very basic or very conventional structure. You have your introduction, you have your body, and then you've got your conclusion at the end. The purpose of an introduction is to give us just enough background information so that we can understand what it is you're writing about, why it's significant to you, and why we should want to continue reading. You might tell me a little bit about who you are, or where the narrative essay takes place, perhaps what age you were when it occurred, or any other details that might be important to us as readers as we look through your work. Remember, you shouldn't expect that somebody reading your work knows everything about you. And if someone doesn't know you very well, and you're going to write about something significant that's happened to you, you have to be able to tell us anything that we need to know in order to understand why this experience that you're writing about means something to you. So set the scene, give us the who, the where, the when, the why, and then create interest in the story. Sometimes people do this by giving just a little bit of information, creating some suspense, but then not saying anything more until we get into the body of the essay. And that's a very effective technique. One of the examples I will show you today does exactly that. Towards the end of your introduction, you will also give us your thesis statement. That's the main idea of your essay. And this is where you just tell us what it is that you're writing about and why. Okay, then once you move into the body of the essay, this is where we get the main event or the meat of the essay. You might divide it into a number of paragraphs or just have one long body paragraph. It really depends on how many words you're planning on writing for this particular essay. You're going to give us the memory or the events that make up the memory in chronological order. Because narrative essays are relatively short, I mean, they rarely go over 1,000 words or so, and in many cases, they're much less. It's not really the time to start mixing up the sequence. You start at the beginning of the experience, you finish at the end, and that's it. You don't need to try and do anything overly abstract or obscure. You'll also include any interesting or important details that might help the reader understand why this experience is so significant to you. And you might remember in the last unit when we looked at descriptive writing, how to use adjectives and different adverbs and other ideas to make your writing more vivid. Narrative writing is also highly driven by descriptive language, because you're going to describe some sort of significant memory. Then we, as readers, want to know, what did something feel like? What could you hear? What did it sound like? What did it smell like? What could you see? If you're describing something that you ate, what did it taste like? All of these things, whatever it was that made the experience memorable, you have to use it with descriptive language. All right, then after you've given us the main event, it's time to quickly close it up. Remember, after the climax of the story, you don't want to stick around for too long, just wrap it up. So give us the outcome or the result. What did you learn as a result of this experience? Or did you perhaps learn a life lesson? Or did it change your life in some way? Or have you carried this experience with you for some reason or another? It's also quite common for writers to give a final thought on the significance of their memory in the conclusion. A quick note, because narrative essays are about events that occurred in the past, you are going to spend most of the essay writing in the past tense, maybe the simple past tense, the past continuous, the past perfect. But it is quite common for writers to start the essay in the present tense because they're starting with the perspective of now, and then they look back into the past. So they start with where they are now, and they might mention the significance of a particular memory, and then they go into the past in the body of the essay, and then they write the body of the essay using the simple past, the past continuous, the past perfect. And then sometimes in the conclusion, they'll come back to the perspective of the present, and then they'll say what it was they've learned and how this memory has shaped their life or been significant in some way. Now, if you want to write about something that's happened in your life, a good question is, well, how long is any particular experience that you want to write about? And the truth is that really does depend on the writer and what they want to focus on. Someone might want to write about a significant event that happened on a single afternoon. So, for example, the whole entire scope of your narrative might take place within a 2 or 3 hour period. Maybe something very important happened in that short period of time. Or you might want to write about several related events that form a much larger, greater experience. For example, writing about your final year in high school. There might have been several related significant events, and the narrative essay will actually have the wider scope of looking at your senior year in high school from, stepping back and looking at these several significant events one at a time and linking them in the different body paragraphs. It really does depend. Do you want to have a narrative essay that zeroes in on a single day or part of a single day, or one that zooms out and gives a broad overview of several different events that formed, a longer period of time that you still put into one category as like one significant memory? It really is up to you, and there are no hard or fast rules about how wide the scope of your writing should be. Okay, here are a couple of important things to remember. Yes, you are writing in the first person point of view, so you're mostly using the past tense. It's also a good idea to use certain phrases and or time clauses, as I believe they're called, that can help us understand that time is passing in the essay. You might have, for example, 6 months later, after 2 weeks, the next month, 4 days later, all of these things which help us see that time is passing. Remember, the reader doesn't necessarily know very much about your life and these particular events. So if you are writing about something that takes place over a longer period of time, show us how the time is passing by using a number of these expressions. Okay. Another thing that you can sometimes do is vary your sentence length. So you might have a couple of longer sentences and then a short, punchy sentence to emphasize a point. This is especially true if you are going to have a shift in tone from, you were happy at some point and then something happened that broke your heart. Having that happen in a very short sentence is sometimes a very effective way of contrasting what happened before with the significant event. Let's take a look here. Using the past perfect. This is a grammar point that I'd like to bring up here. It's quite common to use the past perfect when you write a narrative essay, because when you are writing about different events in the past, you're often going to have either sentences where events happened at slightly different times, or you just want to clarify which event happened first and which event happened after that. So the past perfect event, or the past perfect tense, it's formed by using the past participle, the PP, plus had. And this is sometimes called the past tense, because you're basically putting two events in the past next to each other, and you're using the past perfect to show that it happened earlier. The more recent one is written in the simple past. Here is a good example from the essay that I asked you to read for homework, My Mother's China Cups. When I had dried the cup, we put them back on the shelves. Okay, so very simple here. First, the writer dried the cups, and then the writer, together with her mother, put them back on the shelves. Both of these events happened in the past, in the writer's childhood. The older memory, slightly older, because it's like a few minutes before, I had dried the cups. That's what happened first. After that, we put them on the shelf. We put them back on the shelves. By using the past perfect, we can clearly distinguish which event happened first. Here's another example. By the time he turned 17, he had already learned to drive. Okay, now in this case, we have two different events, a boy turning 17 and learning how to drive. Well, which happened first? He did turn 17. Now, he turned 17, that actually comes earlier in the sentence, but it's actually the more recent event. He had already learned to drive, or he had already learned how to drive. In this case, the past perfect had learned. That shows us that this event, learning how to drive, occurred at an earlier time. Okay, by the way, we will be looking at the past perfect a little bit more next week when we go on to anecdotes. It's a good tense to know how to use well, and it's one that I noticed that some students misuse in their narrative writing. So this is something I want to come back to next week. Okay, so on to the homework, which I asked you to read for today's class. It's called My Mother's China Cups, and it's a one-page narrative essay in which the writer looks back at a significant time in her life when she washed her mother's China cups, and how that event influences her behavior in the present. So in the introduction, the writer tells us that when she thinks of her mother, she remembers her China cups and saucers. Now, as we go through the essay, we'll find out that there is something significant about these China cups and saucers. And there's a reason why when she thinks of her mother, the memory of her mother is very closely connected to the memory of these China cups. Okay, when we move into the body of the essay, this is where the writer now shifts into the past tense. And she tells us that when she was young, her mother had these very exotic China cups and saucers with various colors and designs on them. And she asked her mother whether she could wash these cups and saucers. And for a number of times, the mother said, no, you can't do it. But finally, she convinced her mother to let her wash one of them. And of course, she broke one of them, but the mother smiled and then glued it together later. Now, this is not an action-packed essay. I mean, it's not like there's a lot of things that happen. A young girl washes some cups and saucers with her mother. She drops one. It breaks. The mother smiles and says that's okay, and then glues it back together. It's not really until the conclusion when we really get the significance. And this is when the narrator looks back on the memory and thinks, I realize now, looking back on how my mother smiled and let me continue washing these cups and saucers, which she broke several times. There's one great line towards the end of the body in the essay where the writer says, after a while, some of the cups showed signs of my efforts. That means that she had probably broken some of these cups and saucers several times, and they had been glued back together, and there were obviously some cracks and some chips in them. When we get to the conclusion, the writer remembers her mother's kindness, and then she shares with us how this is significant. Now that she is a mother herself, she tries to remember her mother's kindness and tries to follow that example with her own children. In this sense, her mother is her role model. Just to swing back to the topic of role models for a second. She looks back on her mother's behavior and she thinks that is an example that I want to follow. My mother believed that although the cups and saucers were very important to her, I was more important, and therefore she let me wash the cups, even though she broke a few. So that's the conclusion. In the introduction, we find out what makes her remember her mother, then we get the memory in the body. And although the bulk of the body is just that one experience of washing the cups, we do get later on a bit more information about how she broke them many times later. Anyways, in the conclusion, she remembers her mother's kindness and tries to follow the example with her own kids. Okay, now let's take a look at some common errors that students sometimes make when they write narrative essays. I have looked at literally hundreds and hundreds of essays over the years. And these are some things that I've noticed. Number one, it's very common for students to put too much information in the introduction. They try and cram everything in there. So they might even try and put like a summary of the main event in the introduction. Please don't summarize the whole thing in the introduction. If you do that, then there's no reason for me to read the rest of the essay. What I want you to do is have a good introduction, give me just enough information to understand what it is you're writing about, and to try and generate interest. So, yeah, a good introduction hooks a reader, it doesn't satisfy them. After the introduction, I should want to read more. If I don't want to read more, then it hasn't been a very effective introduction. And if you've already told me everything that I need to know, well, then you've given too much information. So try not to get too bogged down, and also try not to include too many unrelated details. You might think that all of the details that you put in your introduction are necessary, but the fact is, unless it is vitally important to the narrative, it's probably a good idea to cut it out. One of the most common mistakes is to put too much information. Here's a good example. I did not sleep the night before the college entrance exam, so I was very tired in the morning. I had a shower, I had some breakfast at home, and then I walked to the bus stop. There were a lot of people on the bus. I got off the bus and walked up the hill to school. It was a big hill, and my school was very old and didn't have very good facilities. Some of the teachers were very kind and helped me a lot. My best friend was in my class. He wanted to do well on the test. It's going to be a very stressful experience. I felt very nervous. I walked to the classroom. All right, now this example is obviously about someone writing their final exam college entrance exam. And at the end of the introduction, we finally get to the classroom. The student walks in and they're just about to sit down and write, the most important test of their life. The problem is there's too much information before we get to that point. We learned that the person was very tired. They had a shower, breakfast, they took the bus, it was a big hill to school, it was old, the facilities weren't good. All of these other details, we really don't need to know. By the end of the introduction, we're already bored and kind of wondering, oh no, is the body of the essay going to be as filled with irrelevant details as this? I really don't want to read anymore. So try to avoid putting too much information in the introduction. All right, let's take a look at the second example. It was November of 2019. I was sitting in a classroom full of students, and all of them were extremely anxious. I was no exception, and my legs were shaking. The college scholastic ability test was just about to start. I waited for the bell to ring. I'd been preparing for this day for a whole year, and the only thought that filled my mind was that I must get a good grade on this exam. Okay, this is much better. Quick note, it's not important to me that it happened in 2019. You don't need to tell me the year 2019 unless it's significant in some way, or 2020, 2021, 22. If you want to mention the year, only mention the year if that's actually significant. But I like how at the beginning of the essay, we are already in the classroom. The student doesn't waste time with information about their shower, breakfast, or the bus ride. We're in the classroom, and then we just get the details that show us how they're feeling. The person's legs are shaking. The test was just about to start. They're waiting for the bell to ring. Why is it significant? They've been preparing for this day for a whole year. So if this is a Korean student, they've probably been preparing for the college scholastic or the college entrance exam for at least 10 years, this being Korean culture. But you see what I'm trying to say. We don't have any unnecessary information here. The writer gets to the point quite quickly. Here's another example. This is an older one from one of my former students. The winter of 2011 was especially cold and dry in Egypt. I heard gunshots and people screaming again and again outside my family's apartment in Cairo. Oh, hold on here just for a moment. Okay, let me just go through that one more time. Oh, hold on. Here we go. The winter of 2011 was especially cold and dry in Egypt. I heard gunshots and people screaming again and again outside my family's apartment in Cairo. Schools were closed and supermarkets were shut down. The Egyptian revolution, known as the Arab Spring, had reached its peak. My family had two choices. We could either stay home and lock ourselves in or try to go somewhere safe. Outside was chaos. Finally, we decided to take the risk and leave the country. Okay, now in this case, the writer mentions the year 2011. That is significant because it was 2011 when there was a great deal of social and political upheaval in northern Egypt, countries like Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt. So in that case, the date actually is significant. They mentioned the Arab Spring. I like how at the end of the introduction, I want to read more. They have grabbed my interest. Okay, the family is in a very dangerous situation and they have to make a choice. They make the choice. And then the body of the essay is going to describe what happened as a result of making that choice. By the way, you'll notice if I go from halfway through the introduction, the Egyptian revolution known as the Arab Spring had reached its peak. That sentence is fairly medium length. Had reached its peak. My family had two choices. We could either stay home and lock ourselves in or try to go somewhere safe. Outside was chaos. You might remember a few minutes ago, I said that sometimes having a short sentence, especially after longer sentences, draws attention to itself. It can be a punch. And I think this is a great example. The Arab Spring had reached its peak. My family had two choices. We could either stay home and lock ourselves in or try to go somewhere safe. Outside was chaos. Boom. 3 words. Outside was chaos. That brings everything to a halt. By having that short sentence after a couple of longer sentences, it really does drive home the drama of the situation. Finally, we decided to take the risk and leave the country. Very well done. Next, another common error is not to have enough information in the introduction. Remember, I need to know a little bit in order to understand who you are and why this memory is significant. Remember, the reader, this is especially true if you're writing for an audience beyond your professor, doesn't know you, at least not yet. Who is the writer? When did this memorable event happen? Why is it important to the writer? You want to give the reader at least a sense of who you are and why this memory was significant. If not, we might not be able to understand what it is we're reading and why it's important. Another common mistake is to misuse the word risk or misuse the word challenge. The easiest way to define these two terms, if you take a risk, that means you're putting yourself in a situation that involves some kind of danger. And you do this because you hope to gain some kind of benefit. You do something, here's an example. If you take next semester's tuition, your parents have given you money for next semester's tuition and living expenses, and then you buy a bunch of Dogecoin or some other cryptocurrency because your friend told you that the value is going to go up very soon. That would be taking a risk. You're putting yourself in some kind of danger. It could be physical danger. It could be emotional danger. It could be mortal danger. It could be financial danger, like investing all of your money in dodgy cryptocurrency. But that's what a risk is. A challenge, however, is when you try to prove something. You try to prove that you can do something. Maybe you try to prove it to yourself, or prove it to someone in your family, or prove it to a rival. There's often some kind of challenge, or sorry, there's often some kind of competition. And the feeling of reward, that's what you get from undertaking this challenge. There might be some risk in taking a challenge, but the motivation is different. When you take a risk, you're doing it in order to get some kind of benefit. You're hoping to derive some sort of positive result. Whereas the challenge, the feeling of actually accomplishing it, actually doing it, that itself is the reward. Okay, next, special moments in your life. Yeah, I might have mentioned before at the beginning, milestone, turning point, and memorable event. Life is full with different moments, right? And these moments give our lives meaning. A milestone is something that marks a significant change or development, or here's a good example. Let's say when you're young, you start learning Taekwondo. And after a couple of years or however long it takes, you go up the ranks, you go up the different belt colors, and then finally you get your black belt. That's a milestone because you've attained some kind of achievement. You've accomplished something, and that's what a milestone often is. Or they can be developmental too. I mean, if you think about it, learning to speak, that's a milestone. Your first steps, that's a milestone too. Graduating from high school, that's a milestone. Graduating from university, that's a milestone. Your first boyfriend or girlfriend, your first job, your first promotion, your first raise. These are all milestones. If you get 5 different people, they will have some milestones that they have in common. Some people, pretty much everybody learns how to walk, graduates from school, has at least one romantic relationship, gets a job, and maybe does something else. But if you were to look at, for example, President Yoon, Elon Musk, Kim Jong-un, and I don't know who's another, throw somebody else in there. Egon He, I don't know, maybe your mother or father. These 5 different people, because they've made very different choices in their lives, they've also got some individual milestones, which they might not share with other people. Starting your own business, that's a milestone. Getting married, having a first child, these are all milestones too. Turning points, though, are different. They can be positive or negative. It can change your life in a positive way or a bad way. Someone might start doing drugs and then enter a life of crime. In that case, the first time they tried drugs, that was a turning point, because until that point, it didn't look like their life was going to go down that negative road and, begin the journey towards, prison or some kind of destructive lifestyle. Whereas, let's say somebody meets a very influential mentor, and from that mentor, they learn a lot, and then they become a successful business person. Both events would be considered turning points, but for very different reasons. A turning point can change your life in a positive way or a negative way. However, there are many different things in our lives which are not turning points or milestones, but they're just events that have some kind of personal significance. Doesn't need to change our life or be some kind of accomplishment, but for some reason, you just remember that day. And that's a memorable event. Okay, now in class, what I would have done today, one of the activities was to have students together with their partners try and think of 10 different examples of memorable events, turning points, and milestones, and then share their examples with the class, and then the class would try and put them in categories. What do you think is a milestone? What do you think is a turning point? What do you think is just a memorable event? Sometimes it's pretty easy to categorize an event. Oh, this must be a milestone. You know, for example, when somebody, I'll give you the example. Let's say somebody wins a gold medal in the Olympics. That's a milestone. It's not necessarily a change in their life because they've been on this route towards athletic excellence for many years, but it's a great achievement. That's a milestone. A turning point, let's say a near fatal car accident that causes someone to change how they look at life. That would be a turning point. Okay, however, what I'd like you to do for homework, this is not going to be an official writing homework assignment. So this is just for participation. It's not for, it's not one of the 5 homework assignments that I will be giving the semester. What I'd like you to do is watch these 2 video clips, which I have up here on the screen. Both of these short clips contain a memorable experience for the characters. Now, the first clip has 4 different characters, and the second one has 3. I would like you to choose one of the characters in one of the clips and then answer a few questions, because I want you to imagine if you were one of the characters in one of these clips, and then years after the fact, years after that experience, you wanted to write about it. You wanted to write a narrative essay about that experience. Well, how would you do that? What information would you include in the introduction, the body, and the conclusion? So let me just quickly go through that one more time. Choose one of the movie clips and then answer the questions on the worksheet. I'll show you the worksheet in just a second. So yeah, imagine you're one of the characters. After many years, you want to write about the experience. What information would you put in the introduction? What information would the reader need to know before you tell us about the memory? You know, what background do we need to know? Remember, you're not going to tell us the main event, which is the video clip. You're not going to talk about that in the introduction. You're going to give us the backstory. What do we need to know in the introduction, the background, the context, so that we will really understand what is happening in the body? Then what information would you include in the body of the narrative? Would you focus on what actually happened, or would you focus on the emotions, how you felt at the time, or would you focus on both? Try to give me a couple of examples. And then finally, what information would you include in the conclusion? Did you learn something from the experience? Was it a turning point? Or was it just an experience that you remember really, really well? So that's going to be your homework. By the way, the second clip here, you don't need to watch the whole thing. Actually, the first part of the video, it shows 2 friends, 2 middle-aged men, and they are, I think they're at the seaside, they're at the water. And one of them is talking about how depressed he is. And that goes on for about 2 minutes, 1.5, 2 minutes, I think. The part of the clip that I want you to focus on, it's about halfway through. The 2 friends get in their car and they drive back to the hotel where they're staying at. And there's a woman, she's a Korean-Canadian actress, her name is Sandra Oh. She's waiting on the steps for them. That's where I really want you to begin watching the video. When the car pulls into the hotel parking lot. And it's a couple of minutes into the video. If you want to watch the whole video, you can, but the part that I want you to focus on as the memorable experience starts a few minutes in when the car pulls into the hotel parking lot and Sandra Oh sees them and then stands up. So watch both of these video clips and then choose one. All you need to do is, let me just stop sharing that. I'll just quickly show you the page which I've got here. Let me bring it up here. Where is it? Here we are. Share screen. It's been a while since I've done a Zoom video. All right. Here we are. So I have here just a little box. All you need to do is put some information in here. So what background information would you need? There we go. Describe the event. What would you focus on if you were to write a narrative essay about that event in the clip? Either the first clip or the second clip. I don't care which one. And then the third one, what would you mention in the conclusion? I'm looking for at least a few sentences for each question, but feel free to write as much as you would like. I'll read it and check it. However, as I mentioned before, this is not an official 5-point writing assignment. This is just what we would have done in class today. So this would just be for participation. And I will be checking to see who finishes and uploads. Okay, so in this case, you don't need to worry about a title or anything like that. Just go to Cyber Campus assignments, and I'll just say narrative essay classwork or homework, and then just upload the file to that. That's all you need to do. Okay, anyways, I hope everyone has a great weekend. I will see you next Wednesday at 3 o'clock, our regularly scheduled time, and see you then. Okay, so thank you very much for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe, click like, and if you'd like to see more content, ring that bell and consider supporting me on Patreon. All right, thank you very much.